How do you play fantasy football? What do you do? How do you win? I get these questions all the time. Well, guess what? Today I'm going to teach you, and it's honestly really simple. Now, if this is your first time here and you like fantasy football, fantasy basketball, or just NBA and NFL related content, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out. So how does fantasy football even work? Well, it's pretty simple. It's all about the stats. So basically, you start off by drafting a team of players. Now, every Thursday, Sunday, and Monday, while these players are out there actually playing football, they're racking up certain stats, like rushing yards, receiving yards, throwing yards, and touchdowns. Now, what happens in fantasy football is all these stats are basically converted into points. Now, in fantasy football, all you really have to do is outscore your opponent. And obviously, the better your players do, the better chance you have of winning. Easier said than done, right? Now, there are different types of scoring in fantasy football. There's standard and PPR. Now, for the most part, standard and PPR scoring work exactly the same. However, the one difference in PPR, also known as points per reception, is you get a little gift. Every time your player gets a reception, they get a point added on to what they already have. For example, if in standard scoring, a wide receiver gets you 10 points, 5 catches on 100 yards, 10 points. But in PPR, that would add up to 15 points. 10 points for the reception yards and 5 points for the 5 catches they got. Now, since PPR is the ESPN recommended way of playing, we're just gonna focus on that for the rest of the video. So let's start off with probably the most anticipated part of any draft, whether it's football or basketball, the draft. Now, like I said earlier, the draft is where you select your team of players that you will be following all year long. Now, your goal is to pick a combination of players that you think will ultimately lead you to the championship. Now, most drafts are in a snake format. Now, what this means is if you get the first pick in the first round, you're gonna get the last pick in the second round. And then again, first pick in the third round, and so on and so on. So how do you know what players to pick during the draft? Now, ESPN does have their own rankings and projections, but there are plenty of other off-site tools, apps, and draft simulators that you can use to better adjust to the draft strategy that you want to go with. Before your draft, make sure you do research, make sure you know what kind of players you want, your draft strategy, and make sure you have it down packed, do many mock drafts, just so you have a better understanding of what's going to happen. So now let's talk about positions and their scoring breakdown. So let's start off with quarterback. So quarterbacks get the bulk of their points from passing yards and touchdowns. Now, for every passing yard they throw, they get 0.04 points, which means in order to get 1 full point from passing, they have to throw 25 yards. And for each touchdown they throw, they get 4 points. Quarterbacks will also get 2 points for every 2-point conversion they throw. Now, this is kind of rare, but it does happen. And as easy as it is to gain points, they also do throw interceptions where they will lose 2 points. So now let's talk about running backs. So they commonly get their points from running the ball, obviously. So for every yard they run, they get 0.1 points, meaning they need 10 yards to get 1 full point. Now also for every touchdown they score running it in, they get 6 points. And again, if they run it in for a 2-point conversion, they'll get 2 points as well. But again, this is a little rarer. Let's move on to wide receivers and tight ends. Now, wide receivers and tight ends commonly get their points from receiving yards, and they'll get 0.1 points for every yard. So again, for 1 full point, they need 10 receiving yards. Now, in a standard format, they won't get any extra bonus for receptions, but in a PPR league, again, they're gonna get 1 point per reception. And like a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown is also worth 6 points. And again, if they do get a 2-point conversion reception, also another 2 points. Now, quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers aren't only limited to those kind of scoring styles. A quarterback can also run the ball like Lamar Jackson. He gets a bulk of his points from rushing the ball. Running backs like Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, they also get a lot of receptions and get a lot of receiving yards. So they're more dual-purpose running backs that can do it all, basically. Now, every now and then, you'll see wide receivers running the ball or even on a trick play, throwing the ball. Now, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends, they can all also fumble the ball, which will also give them a -2 points. Moving on to kickers. They get 1 point for every extra point they score after a touchdown. They lose -1 if they miss a field goal. And depending on where they kick from, their points vary. So if they kick from 39 yards in, they get 3 points. 49 yards in, 4 points. And anywhere from 50 plus, they get 5 points. Moving on to defenses. Now, defensive scoring is actually really confusing. But for the most part, let's focus on the really simple ones, such as sacks, 1 point per sack. Every interception, they get 2 points. Every fumble forced, they get 2 points. As you know, defenses could also score touchdowns. so they get 6 points for every touchdown they do end up scoring. Now, defenses can score in so much that I'm just going to have a list up here with all the points for you to read off. So feel free to pause the video and go through everyone if you feel like it. Let's get into lineups. Now, in your lineup, each week you're going to have a quarterback, a running back 1, a running back 2, a wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2, a tight end, a flex, a defense, and a kicker. Now, a flex position player is basically any running back, wide receiver, or tight end. Whichever one you want to put in that position gives you a little bit of flexibility. Now, some leagues are 2 quarterback leagues, so they'll actually have 2 quarterbacks in their lineup every week. Now, like I said earlier, games do start on Thursday night, so it's important to make sure that you set your lineup before Thursday night. Once a player's game starts for that week, they are locked into whatever slot they are in. So, for example, if you have a player that's injured and their game started and you forgot to take them out of your active lineup, they're stuck there and you're going to get 0 points for that player. Now, it also works the other way. For example, if you have a player on your bench that you wanted to start but forgot to set up your lineup and now he's on your bench, you're going to get no points for him. That's why it's really important to pay attention to your lineup. Football is a very unpredictable sport. Players do get injured, players do miss games. So it's good to be on top of it all. And just make sure you're following your players so you know if they're going to miss games or you know what players you want in your lineup. And throughout the week, you're always welcome to make any kind of changes that you feel like will help you out. For example, if you're not sure if a player is going to miss the game yet, again, you have until the game starts to make that decision. Now in football, there are also bye weeks. So this is going to be a week off for the team to rest. Players have different bye weeks, so it's important to pay attention to that so you can make the necessary adjustments throughout the week. So why don't we talk a little bit more about setting your lineup. Now, like I said earlier, I believe that it's best to set your lineup before Thursday night's game. And while you're working your way through the week, if anything does happen, like a player does end up missing a game, just take him out and replace him back in your lineup. Now, how do you decide on which player to start and which player to bench? Now, ESPN gives you rankings throughout the week and player projections for that week, depending on which defenses they're playing, depending on how well they're doing so far in the year. Now, warning, just because a player is projected, let's say 20 points, doesn't mean they're always gonna get 20 points. More often than not, a lot of players underperform and some players overperform. For beginner players, it would be wise to take account of projections and rankings to end up making your decision, depending on which players ranked higher, which players projected more points. But again, you could always use the ranking websites, the ESPN projections, and your own knowledge to better decide which players to start, which players to bench. Now, why don't I set my lineup for the next coming week so you guys might have a better understanding of what to do. So I'll be setting up my lineup for week 12 of the 2019 season. So why don't we take a look at my team and see what to do. So I'm just gonna scroll through my team so you guys can stop and take a look. Now, as you can see, I have Ross Dwelley in at tight end. And this was because my starting tight end, George Kittle, was out. But next week, he will be returning. So I'm gonna put George Kittle right back in for Ross Dwelley. Last week, Saquon Barkley also had a bye week. But this week, I'm gonna start him. So why don't I move him back up over Miles Sanders. Now, 49ers play the Green Bay Packers, and Aaron Rodgers is kind of a scary guy. While my Bears defense plays against the Giants, and they play against Daniel Jones, who throws a lot of interceptions, gets a lot of fumbles, and the Giants don't really score that much. So I feel better starting them over the 49ers. Now, unfortunately for me, I am dealing with a lot of injuries with wide receivers. I have AJ Green out, Alshon Jeffrey out, and T.Y. Hilton out. However, T.Y. Hilton and Alshon Jeffrey and AJ Green, they all might play this week. So as the week goes on, I make sure to pay attention to the news to see if there's any new news basically on whether or not they're gonna play or continue to miss games. And if they do end up coming in to play, I could always just swap them in for maybe Marquise Brown, who I don't think will have a good game against the Rams because he's also kind of hobbled up. Now, the rest of the people in my roster are basically mainstays who already went through their bye weeks, aren't injured, are going to start for me basically every week. It's pretty simple to fix your lineup. As you can see, I'm projected about 120 points for next week. And this is a half PPR league, actually. So for every reception, you get half a point. Other tools that you could use to help make your decision is this little section right here. Now, this is, I believe, opposing player ranking, which is basically, for example, their defensive ranking against that type of player. So Lamar Jackson plays the Rams, and the Rams are the 12th best at stopping quarterbacks. Leonard Fournette plays the Titans, 16th best at stopping running backs. Saquon Barkley plays the Bears, 22nd worst at stopping the run. Allen Robinson plays the Giants, 29th worst at stopping wide receivers. George Kittle plays the Packers, 27th worst at stopping tight ends. Now the Bears play the Giants, and the Giants give up a lot of points to defenses, 30th worst in the league. You could also check out what percentage of leagues actually ended up starting this player and what percentage of leagues have this player rostered, as well as their increase in rosterization over the course of, I think, a week. Now, if we move on over to here, you can see that player's ranking in their respective field: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and also the fantasy points they put up so far in the season and their average amount of points so far in the season. Now let's talk about the waiver wire. And as I say all the time, a fantasy football league is won in the waiver wire. Football is a very unexpected sport. A lot of players do get injured, unfortunately. A lot of players do get traded, and this opens up opportunity for other players. The waiver wire is where you can pick up players that other teams have dropped or other teams never drafted. Now, again, players do get injured, unfortunately. They do get traded, which opens up opportunity for other players below them. For example, last year, Le'Veon Bell didn't play a single game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but James Conner ended up starting for them and ended up being maybe a top 10 running back for the year. And in most leagues last year, James Conner wasn't even drafted. He was picked up from the waiver wire. So for those lucky few that ended up actually picking him up, they got a first-round player off the waiver wire. Now, the waiver wire is kind of confusing to understand at first, but it gets really simple once you get the hang of it. Basically, the waiver wire opens up every Wednesday morning at, I think, maybe 3 or 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. After this, owners in your league are allowed to add and drop at their will, depending on who they want to pick up. Maybe they have a quarterback on bye, so they need to pick up another quarterback to play that week. Now, when a player does get dropped, anyone around the league is free to pick them up. However, they just have to wait to claim them. Now, what do I mean by claim? So if I drop a player, there's going to be a waiver period of 2 days. So now, for 2 days, no one can pick him up. However, after that time, he's free to add on anyone's team. Now, during that 2-day span where they are under waivers, you can also put in a claim for that player. Now, what this means is that you think this player is going to be a very popular ad and want to pick him up before everybody else can. So what happens if more than one person puts in a waiver for the same player? So the person with the highest waiver priority actually ends up getting that player. Now, how most leagues work is once you pick up a player and use your waiver priority, you head down to the bottom of the list. And until you use your waiver priority again, you remain up. So every time someone uses their waiver priority, they head to the bottom of the list, and it just keeps going around like a circle. Some owners don't like to use their waiver priority early on in the season, and they like to use it later on in the season near the playoffs. And on the other hand, some owners also use their waiver priority almost every week, so they have better matchups and better players to use throughout that week in particular. So that's all for my How to Play Fantasy Football guide. I will be making a fantasy basketball guide, as well as probably fantasy football tips and fantasy basketball tips. Another video I have in mind are must-have apps for fantasy owners. So if you guys are interested in all of that, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.